It is Friday, February 7th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Deliverance 2 episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The February lineup is live on PSN, so you can go ahead and claim those games. And let's begin with some smaller news stories, starting off with Helldivers 2 getting its PS5 Pro enhancement, now live on PSN, which kind of came out of nowhere to the point where the store listing for this game still does not have its Pro enhancement label, which it's kind of weird how this entire time so far that enhancement label is never a guarantee that the game does have the patch live on PSN. Just having some intentions of having that enhancement seems to get the label on PSN, which is a little bit inconsistent. But over on Digital Foundry, Alec Vermacki did already take a look at this, so we do know it's a fairly minimal Pro enhancement. You're getting some better image quality, the details increased when playing on performance mode. The Pro version is now 1440p versus 1080p on the base console. It's still using TAA, and there's a simple spatial upscaling method, so no PSSR, but in some of the heavier scenes with a lot of enemies on screen, the frame rate can still dip, but not as hard as the base console. So just something to keep in mind if you've been off Helldivers 2 for a little bit. The Pro enhancement is now there, so probably a good time to jump back into that game. We can also mention Spider-Man 2, the PC version just came out, and this is not shaping up to be all that good, so a lot of big performance issues with the game, some crashing going on. There's already been 2 hotfixes sent out to address the crashing and the bugs. Also, the peak CCU count was like 28,000, which is never a great indicator as far as how many copies the game sold, but it is an indicator enough when you, say, benchmark that to Spider-Man Remastered, which debuted up to like 66,000 for its opening weekend or something like that. We are seeing that a lot of the PlayStation PC stuff, the novelty has definitely worn off to a degree, and more so when you consider a lot of the negative press that Sony's gotten for their PC releases relating to not just the games coming out in bad shape and then having mixed reviews for those games, but also the PSN requirement thing, which in this case is now optional for this game in particular. So they're in the right direction, but we've got some missteps with this one, and it's unfortunate given that Nexus was also heavily involved with this particular port. So you would have thought that the game would come out in a much more stable, polished fashion. So we'll see them clean this game up hopefully over time, but it's a very old story for the PC audience, which is these games come out, and oftentimes it takes a number of patches for them to finally be cleaned up. Moving on to our next news story, it seems like we don't have to wait too long for the next State of Play presentation, which will probably happen sometime next week, based on what was originally the source of this rumor, Nate the Hate. He put out a more recent tease as far as like when exactly that State of Play is going to happen, and so he was implying heavily that it would be Valentine's week, or, you know, either really close to the day, maybe right on the day. The thing is, that was posted a few days ago. Just yesterday, however, PSN leaked a new trailer for Metal Gear Solid Delta with a full release date in there as well. So very clearly, that was probably supposed to be a part of the State of Play presentation. So we do have new footage of that game where we now know it's coming out August 28th. It's a real, genuine leak from the PlayStation Store, so it's about as real as it gets, which, by the way, near the end of that trailer, and also we have a screenshot of this, but the monkey versus snake mode, or snake versus monkey mode, is in there as well, which is so crazy to see a modern Ape Escape, which looks beautiful, and I mean, that too is just more PlayStation tie-ins, obviously, so it's just, that was probably part of the announcement. And there's just other happenings going on as well. So Hideo Kojima is doing his typical thing on Twitter where he's teasing that he's editing a new trailer for Death Stranding 2, which the game was recently rated in South Korea. So games getting rated, proximity to release, that's actually very good news. So we could see a release date trailer for that game as well. And there's just a lot of other things we could see, that being like Ghost of Yotei gameplay or something with Wolverine, if, you know, Insomniac's ready to say that. I think maybe Wolverine's not going to happen at this upcoming State of Play, but that's one possibility. There's also maybe a formal reveal for the Horizon multiplayer game. Third-party stuff, you could see Resident Evil 9 get a proper reveal. Maybe a release date for Lost Soul Aside coming out of the China Hero Project. And then there's just other stuff, right? You can list off Marathon or Fair Games if they're ready to show more of that. PSVR 2 trailers. I mean, the good thing about State of Play is always at this point is whenever they make the announcement, let's say it's Tuesday or Wednesday and it airs on Thursday or Friday, whatever the case is, they'll usually outline what is going to be in there. So they'll clarify right away if it's third party announcements with some PSVR 2 things or a focus on PSVR 2, or if PlayStation Studios will or will not be there, considering DS2 is still technically a PS Studios game for the most part. That might qualify, but we're really just splitting hairs here. The point is we shouldn't have to wait too long to see this announcement. Next up, we have some business announcements to go over, beginning with the Sumo Group, where they're the parent company of Sumo Digital, and Sumo Digital has been a partner studio with Sony on primarily Little Big Planet, so they did LBP3, Sackboy Big Adventure. A long time ago, they did Super Rub-a-Dub on PS3, which that game's always so silly and fun to look back on. But the point is, Sumo Digital, they're primarily a contract studio. They don't really do their own IP. They're always handling stuff for other publishers and other studios. So they were working on their own IP, but the news here is that they're actually canceling that, and they made the announcement that they're going to be refocusing their business to work on what they've always been doing, which is development services for their partners. And they do say that transition will have an impact on their studios and people, which is never good news. That's just one of like 4 or 5 announcements this past week, which is more layoffs in this industry. It's been just so brutal. The bloodshed is not stopping even this year, so that's like more onto the tens of thousands of jobs that have left this industry and not returned, which is always ugly. But the point here is that Sumo Digital, they were on the XDev leak list from like 3-4 years ago now, if you remember that, which that leak list has been completely true and genuine. Most of it either we know of, it came out, or it was canceled. This is one of like one other projects on there that have not happened just yet as far as us learning about it. So that would be Project Carbon. It's listed as an open world game on PS5. This technically would mean that that project, we would assume, is still going on. It's not a new IP that Sumo themselves are doing for themselves that they're going to self-publish. This is still a project that's for a development partner. So it's just a reminder, I guess, because this game has been like the one thing on there that we have not seen just yet, and we don't know if it's been canceled or not, so it's kind of a waiting game as far as like if we'll ever see what this title actually is. But at least for the announcement from Sumo, in theory, this game would not be canceled, but chances are we may see the game at some point or never see it. Moving on to some DMCA takedowns from Sony, which they don't actually do too often, but in this case, it's for Bloodborne after years later. And why? So that's the news going on here. Some of you might be familiar with Lance McDonald. He's the one that put out the Bloodborne 60 FPS patch back in 2021, so years ago now at this point. He's also done like boundary breaking stuff for PT, looking into the game's code, how it works. He's done a lot of really fascinating things over on his channel, and he knows that I pop into his streams occasionally with the chat, so shout out to Lance. But it is something where recently he was hit with a DMCA for his patch, which he also clarified that it was not the patch itself, but rather using the name Bloodborne in the listing for it where he put it up, and so that's why it was taken down, because that's the trademark that Sony has grounds to protect, which Sony also does this through an enforcement company called MarkScan, so it's just a company they contract out. But basically this happened with Lance, and right next to that we also had Lilith Walther, the creator of the Bloodborne PSX demake, also the Bloodborne carding game. If you remember months ago, the Bloodborne carding game, they got a notice to remove the Bloodborne name, but they could still make that project, and they even put it out. So at the time, the news was the Bloodborne name you can't do, but, we'll kind of be hands-off with the rest of it, and that was actually kind of a good thing. But more recently, their Bloodborne PSX video on their channel got hit by MarkScan, so that's down. And very recently, the game itself was also taken down, but it was called Bloodborne PSX. So it's still something where Sony is protecting the trademark in the way that they can, in theory. And Lance is also taking the stance of like, well, obviously I could put the patch back out there, but, considering Sony seems to be a little bit more aggressive in this space, he's going to be hands-off, and I don't blame him whatsoever on that front. But, the running theory with what's going on right now is that maybe Sony is finally doing something with the property, in theory, And they want to control the search terms for this game so that when you're looking it up, you're not getting Bloodborne PS1 or, the karting game or the 60 FPS patch, because in theory, maybe they have a product that they now want to start selling to you again or something like that. I mean, it's always the running carrot on the stick argument of maybe they're finally going to do a remaster, PC port, PS5 patch, something. The game obviously does not need a full-blown remake, but just something where they enhance the game a bit on PlayStation 5 and PC, and maybe that's finally happening. Now, I'm not sure if this is really concrete evidence, but there's something there. Something is clearly going on. Lance put out that patch 4 years ago now at this point, so it's just the timing seems a little bit odd, especially given that, as I mentioned at the top of the story, Sony doesn't do DMCA all that often, and you can take that from somebody that's been covering PlayStation for 13 years and has done thousands of uploads with trailers and covering, official news stories, unofficial, leaked things, leaked material. I just have not really had a problem with them, genuinely. It's kind of miraculous that they are very lenient generally in the space. Only the more egregious things they will sometimes step in, like PS5 Pro internal documentation. Like that was a genuine SIE takedown. So it happens sometimes, but in this case, it is something where you have to raise an eyebrow and wonder, what are they doing? Is something finally going on? You would hope. Where there's smoke, sometimes there is indeed fire. Now, in somewhat related news here, we also have Kadokawa's Q3 financial earnings, where they did openly outline their new capital and business alliance with Sony. Now that Sony is the largest shareholder, they did close on that position. So we have a slide here showing off what they're looking to do, which pretty much all of it does relate to the production and distribution of animation, film, IP creation, even web services. But if we look under the gaming category, a specific action is listed as, quote, a further expansion of the scope of the company's game publishing, which I think could be interpreted in a few different ways. I think the safe conclusion here would be that maybe Sony is going to start publishing some of their games, and I know the one studio we always look at here would be From Software. That's the one that is the most relatable and pertinent. So we know for the time being Elden Ring Night Rain is going to be through Bandai Namco, but after that, what does that mean? Will Sony start publishing their games? Which, to clarify, I fully expect they'll still be multi-platform, but it still would be something where Sony can and possibly could be the publisher. So they would be the ones collecting a percentage off of game sales on competing platforms. They would be handling the distribution of that game. So it's a possibility. I think it is a little bit open-ended as far as what it could realistically mean long-term, but in this case, it does clearly show the alliance and what they're looking to accomplish. In other business news, we also have the announcement that SN Systems, which is a company Sony acquired 20 years ago, they primarily make development tools for PlayStation hardware, they are now going to be fully absorbed into SIE, because for the past 20 years they've been primarily an independent subsidiary. They were owned, but now they're going to be completely absorbed in, which on the surface that might not seem like a big change, but this might be related to what were also some potential layoffs going on at the company as well, because we're hearing that Oscar Diaz, a senior design technologist on the company's UI and UX department, they say most of their team was laid off. Now, we have no other confirmation outside of this one person saying this. No SIE spokesperson has chimed in, confirmed how many layoffs are going on, but it seems like this one team is gone and they're bringing in SN Systems. Maybe they're going to handle the UI stuff. They said they were working primarily on PS5, PSVR 2, and the PS mobile app, so that general user experience. Now, layoffs never fun, obviously, but it seems like there is some reorganization going on behind the scenes that the company is not fully disclosing right now, because we do have the real announcement from last week of all the senior leadership being shuffled around. So, and that would be effective April 1st as well, right? So it does seem like things are in motion here, and we do have to bear in mind too, Sony likes to make a new UI every console cycle. We're a little over 2 years out from, say, PlayStation 6 in theory, so they might be doing something to prepare for that console and what that sort of user experience is going to look like from a development standpoint. I mean, I don't know if I should really speculate too much, but maybe that's what's going on. Although I really don't like seeing layoffs happen if that is indeed what took place, because why could these people not have remained or moved to a different portion of the company. It's rough, man. It's really, really rough. But it seems like maybe that is what's happening. Moving on to a rumor for Santa Monica's new IP, which I want to make very clear, this is a rumor that is very dubious. We almost never cover these where the source is from 4chan. These pop up all the time, but this one seems reasonably plausible enough to at least humor, so we'll talk about this one, which is some alleged concept art for this game, which shows the actor Deborah Williams playing an apparent important NPC that helps the protagonist in this game, and they do list off a few things about it being a science fantasy game, the plot being set in the future, so humanity has been reduced to the medieval era, and humans can control magic through a type of technological device similar to a nuclear reactor that is the last remnant of humanity's golden age. The main kingdom is threatened by a dark society of wizards, and they want to summon a space demon. That's the the synopsis there that we're being given. It all sounds wacky and bizarre, but at the same time, it's like, well, what's funny is that I think everybody was sort of expecting, okay, Naughty Dog's new IP is going to be fantasy, like high fantasy or something, and then Santa Monica was going to be doing the sci-fi stuff, and it seems like it's kind of reversed, so to speak. And then Santa Monica 2, like this description sounds, I don't want to say super similar, but in core principle similar to Horizon in a way, right? Where you're sort of mixing new age stuff with going back to tribalistic, mannerisms. So it's interesting. The concept art also, I would say, does look believable. Deborah Williams has also been in a lot of games, so it's plausible. I'll say that. I mean, we've definitely covered 4chan stuff a long time ago, years ago. Then we got a lot more picky around here as far as which rumors I think are even worth humoring. I don't want to steer people in the wrong direction as far as the things we talk about and what we're expecting. That's just not really what we're looking to do. But in this case, I thought, you know what? I could see that happening. Now, when would it happen is the real big question. I would love to think that we're going to see their new IP within the next 1 or 2 years, but man, it's every time I think it's going to happen, it never does. Moving on to more Xbox games being confirmed and rumored for PlayStation 5, which at a certain point this will stop being news once it's the new normal. But we're still in that transitionary period as far as which games are coming over. So the confirmed ones that we just learned about is Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition coming spring 2025, and also Age of Mythology Retold coming March 4th, 2025 as well. Now, it really does seem like the floodgates are open here because rumor-wise, there's just so much going on. There's Xdos 1S claiming that the Gears of War Trilogy collection is going to launch day one on PS5 next to Series S, X, and PC. Another site, Vandal, says that according to their sources, Killer Instinct and Starfield are the next ones to come over as well, with Flight Simulator and Fable on the way too. And then, of course, the Master Chief Collection has been named a few times now at this point. More recently on ClickR3, we talked about this as well, where it seems like maybe Master Chief is going to happen this year. And that would be the big one. That would be the biggest one, which is the most iconic Xbox property now being on PlayStation hardware. So that'll certainly make big headlines, no doubt about that. You would think after a year from where we are now, it'll probably sort of simmer down if that big stuff does get the reveal and it's out there. It's funny because John was proposing the idea of oh, what if Master Chief shows up during the State of Play, and it's well, that would be kind of insane, if only because yeah, we know Microsoft is shipping games on PlayStation now, but we've never sort of seen a very cordial agreement where it's yeah, you can release on our platform and we'll even throw it into one of our own presentations and sort of feed into the fan display here, the fanfare, so to speak, right? Especially since Microsoft has been seemingly doing that more with directs and not State of Plays, but that would be sort of stepping over that line of wow, it's really that nowadays, right? They're just a publisher, and it's completely agnostic as far as where they are okay with letting their games go. But for the time being, we have all those things going on, more Xbox games. It's just a matter of when it's going to feel normal, and we're not there just yet. Moving on to an issue with the PlayStation Store that Sony has been trying to address, but not really for a long time now, which is what was previously a lot of like very easy trophy games that were asset flip titles, which, they're fine, I suppose, in theory, but they just flood the store to where they take up so many rows and tiles, and it's just store clutter, it's garbage. One could easily argue that Sony should just be flat out rejecting these games. And so that was an issue for years up until Sony started to deprioritize the listing of those games. So I believe they still were able to come out, but they would not show up on the new games section or recently released, things like that. They sort of reduced the visibility of those games, and that was good. But recently we've seen a new problem crop up, which is AI-driven experiences now, or rather AI imagery being used for the key art of certain games, which can be very misleading, especially because the AI is also being applied to the screenshots on store listings for games as well. So you've just got a lot of really questionable, probably really bad stuff that is again flooding the PlayStation Store. And so we had a really interesting piece over on IGN from Rebecca Valentine where they talked about the AI asset flip games that are plaguing PSN, the eShop, and Steam. They were speaking with developers that have experienced releasing games on all storefronts and also talking about what goes into certification, what store is the most lax, and how to get your games listed, which always important to clarify, certification is not quality assurance. That's more a technical process that the game has to pass. That could be things like the behavior of a game when a save file is corrupted, looking into what happens if a controller is disconnected. A lot of very technical things. That's what cert is. Also looking at age ratings, for example. It's not QA, basically. But once a game does pass that, it can be listed on the store. And so from there, each platform holder does this differently. So Microsoft actually does a really good job here. They vet things on a game-by-game basis. Whereas Sony and Nintendo, if you get dev portal access initially, you're pretty much good to go at that point. So the store page for individual games, they'll check that once, but after that, the game can be released. And so even during that one check, they're not exactly vetting the game for accuracy or looking at misleading gameplay or AI imagery. There's still really no sort of policy on how AI generation can be used on PSN or for the store listing of a game or the content of a game. There's nothing like that as of right now. We also had the YouTube channel Dead Domain cover these games a few weeks ago, and they made a really great point that's been true of these games for a long time now, which is the businesses listed is usually, they're impossible to find or contact. There's not really any accountability for these games and the kind of stuff that they're putting out on PSN and the eShop. And these people are abusing the systems on the eShop or PSN by making sure their content sits at the top of the stores. So with PSN, for example, the recently announced games where as long as you announce a generic 2025, 26 label, it'll always sit at the top of the store or something for a game that you can wish list. And these are all the kind of games that you probably don't want to see. Now, the interesting thing here is that the same day, it was pointed out on PSN profiles that all games from the developer Random Spin Games were delisted from PSN, which if you include all version variants, that's like 138 something games that seemingly fall in that category of the AI slop sort of misleading imagery. And that's really what it is too. I mean, the problem, again, for the longest time was the asset flip stuff that was very cheap and they just hand out platinums, which there's always an argument there to be made of like, we should not be allowing games to have a platinum if they hand them out so easily. It's devaluing the trophy system and what it means for other players when they want to build a PSN profile that they're proud of, right? It devalues the entire system. So there's an argument that those games should not have been a thing, and they were around for a very long time. But now we've got this, which is, with the use of AI generation, you can put up these images that, for the uninformed, it looks very misleading as far as what the game is going to be, right? The gameplay and the presentation, all that stuff is very likely not going to be the experience you end up having in the end. And Sony, that's the thing. They've never sort of had this system in place where they're really diving further into each particular game that ends up releasing on the PlayStation Store. As Rebecca pointed out, it seems like the current system in place is when you're in the dev portal, it's kind of hands off at that point. Like, games just get published. Seemingly, there really does need to be a system in place behind the scenes where there's a bit more manual review at least on a, business by business basis of the kind of games they're putting out, and also looking heavily at, say, user reviews. This is why it is a bit problematic, and I've made this point before, which is if you start rejecting games from your storefront, which, Sony has every right to do, but it does become a gray area of where is the cutoff, because bad games are a dime a dozen, but why can't those release on the store if it is still sort of a genuine project that is also, at the very minimum, presenting itself in a very open manner, which is the screenshots and the key art for the game on PSN. Who's to say that game, can't be on the store? And sometimes a game can be really good, but may not appear as though it looks very good, right? It's just, it does become a little bit of a slippery slope, especially as AI imagery gets so much more complex and hard to differentiate. The synthetic look is still there, but at a certain point, it's going to be just indistinguishable. So there's a mountain of issues that this does present, but in theory, Microsoft has been able to navigate this in a very responsible way. Now, one could probably make the argument that a lot of studios are not looking to target that platform because of the install base, but there's still something in place that does check every game on a title-by-title basis. It seems like Nintendo is the worst offender here. Sony is not that far behind them. Steam's got a lot of it too, obviously, but Steam is just a self-publishing platform where there's just so much stuff that comes out on there. So it's a mix of being able to have a system that can properly deprioritize this content, not give it the visibility based on user feedback, and having a manual review process for bad actors that are signing up to the dev portal and abusing this. It's a multifaceted issue, but it's weird that like the same day a ton of titles were delisted from PSN. So I don't know if it was like they were acting that fast on it from the article. There was no comment, no response for comment when IGN reached out to Nintendo or Sony, but they're aware of it. It's just they must not have anything in place just yet. And I would sincerely hope they're looking into it, because this does kind of go back to a conversation from a few weeks ago, which is I am frustrated with the PlayStation Store. There are so many things on there that block you from discoverability. And these games, if they're not dealt with now, it's going to get worse and worse. So I do hope that they are looking into this big time. Moving on to yet another interview with Shuhei Yoshida. This time he was speaking with Ben Hansen over on MinnMax for about 2 hours. It was another open book thing where Shuhei was just answering all this stuff, and it was a great conversation. I'll leave it linked as always. I encourage you to watch the whole thing. Ben did a great job, and we've got some cool things to point out here. So again, I encourage you to see the whole thing, but for the ones I wanted to point out here, something super specific was he was asked what happened to that copy of Killzone Shadowfall that was used in the How to Share Games on PS4 video. I would never think to ask that, but apparently that copy belonged to Adam Boyes. So in that very off-the-cuff moment where Adam Boyes said, hey, why don't we do this shoe, that was his copy of the game, and apparently Adam still has it. So there's that. He was also asked what was a big moment or announcement from the competition that scared Sony. His answer initially was the Xbox 360, how it was going to launch a year early, but then Shuhei said it was also how the 3DS dropped the price by $100 and secured the next Monster Hunter as a 3DS exclusive. His words sort of, I don't want to say verbatim, but he was like, oh my God, or something. That was definitely a very big moment, mind you, for those that really forgot the importance of when all that stuff played out, because Monster Hunter was huge on PSP. I mean, my God, that entry on PSP, it made it the #1 selling system in Japan for it was something crazy, 50, 70, 30, however long it was, weeks straight. The PSP was just, you could not outsell the thing. It was a system seller, textbook definition, and so to not have that on PlayStation Vita was huge. It was a very big blow, outside of all the other things that Shuhei also agrees at being, over-engineered, as he mentioned, with the back touch and, of course, the memory card. So he agrees with, say, Sean, for example, and everybody else that often talks about Vita, but that still was a very big thing that stung, and so he said that was one of the biggest moments that was a big surprise that scared them. Something else he was asked about was a big moment in PlayStation history. Let's say there's a fork in the road. Which moment were you glad you went down one and not the other? And the funny thing is, Shuhei gave the opposite answer here because he said, oh no, the road we went down was the one we should not have gone down. So he said it was PS3 because it was so expensive, hard to make games for, so he wished that Ken Kudaragi's team did not go that way. I love that. That is so funny, man. He's like, oh yeah, so what big moment, what fork in the road? And you're like, ooh, thank God we didn't do that. Shuhei's answer was, no, we took that road and it was PlayStation 3. I always love hearing how much of a sort of horror story it was behind the scenes with PS3, because we all know the console had a very tough time initially, so that was a very funny answer. Another thing Shuhei was asked was one of the biggest moments in his career. He said it was the 2016 E3 moment where God of War was revealed with live gameplay from Cory Barlog that was also kicked off with a big live musical performance from Bear McCreary. And man, I could not agree more. Granted, this is not the question for me because I don't work there. I didn't work there, and I'm not the one leaving after 30-something years, but that is absolutely just like a peak PlayStation moment that still feels like it wasn't that long ago. Not looking back, it's like nearly 9 years ago, but man, I still sometimes go back and look up reaction videos. I can easily like piss away an hour of my time watching reaction videos from that E3 where people got to see the rebooted Kratos, and oh, by the way, you're seeing all this live gameplay takeout and it's over the shoulder, and who's this kid, and it looks gorgeous, by the way, because it's the first God of War we saw on PlayStation 4 hardware, and it was just one of the coolest, craziest moments, man, by far. It was so awesome. That's still why I do miss the E3 live presentation style thing. The live streams nowadays, they just don't have that touch. So that was cool to hear from Shuhei where he agrees, like, yeah, that was a really big moment for me. Moving on to some news for The Last of Us HBO Season 2, which we are getting very close to now at this point. So recently, Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann were speaking with Entertainment Weekly, talking about a few things. We do know that there's going to be some cut content from the game that we'll then see in the show. That's good. There's one character in the game that's often referred to, but they never show up, and they're going to have a role in the show as well, which is good. I want to see them definitely explore those things, kind of similar to what they did with, say, Frank in Season 1. They also talked about how Caitlin Dever's Abby didn't bulk up for the show because apparently there's not as much violent moment-to-moment action, so it's more about the drama, and they're not saying there's no action, but just different priorities, which I think is a fair thing to say. I don't know. It almost reads to me like Caitlin didn't want to bulk up or something. I don't know. It would have been kind of fun to see her do that. But they also mentioned this, which is Mazin said that the story is likely to extend past Season 3, because that was the one unknown for a while, is we don't know if this is going to be 2 seasons or 3 for the second game. Now, it reads as though they're going to extend it past the games, but that's not, well, at least the way I'm reading it, it does sound like, oh, no, Season 2 is still going to be, or rather the second game is still going to be included in all those seasons, I should say. So that means 2, 3, and 4 would all be for the second game. And now I'm starting to piece together where the breakpoints would be. So, and I think there was a little leak that came out that sort of inferred what these 7 episodes are going to be about and what sort of events they're going to cover and where the breakpoint will be. And I think everybody agreed where that first one would be. But the second one, in theory, would probably be that sort of final arc in the game. I'm not going to spoil anything, obviously, but there is for those that play the game, you know there's a final arc in the game, and that would probably be the area that would be extended to another season, which is interesting because that final act is not super long. So that would mean a full-blown season of even 7-8 episodes. That would seem very long for what is that portion of the game, if that is what they do end up doing. But that was definitely fascinating to hear, and I'm so excited for this upcoming season. It is going to get, it's going to get real. It's going to get insane. It's going to be wild. Next up, we would be remiss to not mention what's been going on here in the U.S., which is the new administration that's been going haywire with so many different executive orders and proposed tariffs, which could very much negatively impact the game's business. So we do have a statement here from the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, regarding the proposed tariffs, which they say, and I quote here, "Video games are one of the most popular and beloved forms of entertainment for Americans of all ages. Tariffs on video game devices and related products would negatively impact hundreds of millions of Americans and would harm the industry's significant contributions to the U.S. economy. We look forward to working with the administration and Congress to find ways to sustain the economic growth supported by our sector. The thing is, like, things move so fast with what's been going on in just a month that it's hard to say what will actually end up happening. You know, for weeks I'm like, some sort of exception is going to get made or something, because that's just how this stuff always plays out, or like deals will get cut, or, just politics will happen. Politics going to politics, and these industries are going to continue operating as they otherwise would, conceivably. But it's looking like a very real scenario where things are going to end up happening that may make these products a lot more expensive, and I would hate to see that happen because games are already monumentally expensive to the point where there's so many unsustainable developers and publishers that are doing massive layoffs. I mean, we're not really in a position where we can squeeze even more than we're already squeezing, because we're also in this economic environment where people are just so conscious of saving money and trying to live. It's awful. There's just so much that's been moving. We'll watch this closely and see what happens. There was also, I know, the proposal of how this would affect physical video games. I will say for that, Sony is pretty well positioned to navigate that in particular, because they have a company in Indiana that's like where a lot of like North American physical games are produced and they come out of. It's first and third party PlayStation 5 physical software, and a lot of it also comes from Austria as well. So they've got all that going on. There's also a free trade zone in Brazil, which they've got a facility that they kicked back up to manufacture discs for South America, and maybe that could be a where they could funnel in some product if they need to. The company is positioned for physical software, but again, like, it's moving so fast that who's to say what exactly is going to transpire. Best to just sit for the time being and see what plays out, but it's looking like some things will happen. Now, this story might come as a slight surprise here, but the Entertainment Software Association, the ESA that made E3, and then E3 was also killed by them because they couldn't get any traction for a new show, well, now they are doing a new show called ICON, the Interactive Innovation Conference, which will take place April 27th to the 30th, 2026 in Las Vegas, which it's going to be like keynotes and engaging discussions and workshops with industry leaders and those even like outside of this particular sector. So other mediums, I guess, will also be involved. But we do know, confirmed, Amazon Games will be present, also Disney, Electronic Arts, Epic Games, Microsoft, Nintendo of America, and yes, Sony Interactive Entertainment, Square Enix, Take-Two Interactive, Ubisoft, and Warner Brothers Games. So they do have backing where these entities will show up, but it does sound like it's not E3, not even close to E3. It seems more to me like possibly a GDC, not even a game developers conference, but I don't know, just some sort of maybe keynote thing that is more about broader ideologies. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's even remotely close to an E3, and maybe somewhat similar to a GDC, but they're not saying a whole lot. I just thought it was really noteworthy that the ESA does have a new event coming, and they've already got the big names signed on with SIE included. So it's definitely worth watching this, which we will do. It's far away, obviously. It's over a year, but we'll see what happens. I would think that we might have some news come out of this event when it does take place in Vegas in 2026. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X. And if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was a discussion about a recent Sean Layden interview, former chairman of Worldwide Studios, speaking with Reese over on Kiwi Talks. He went over a lot of interesting things. We just had to cover that as well, even talking about PS6, if he thinks that console will accept discs or not. And then we also had a new Click R3 episode go live yesterday, nearly 3 hours long, so covering a lot of the recent PlayStation news stories at great greater length. And then coming up, as always, probably more uploads on either Sunday or Tuesday, depends, but that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.